Eagles minicamp came and went, and the stars and new additions, of course, shine for the most part, but with every surprise standout comes players who underperformed and could be dangerously close to being cut if training camp doesn't go their way. There are quite a few Eagles in jeopardy. Let's look at them. I'm Thomas Mott. This is the Thomas Mott Show. Really quickly, you might have seen tweets going around today stating that Darius Slay said the Birds will not be wearing their Kelly Green uniforms in 2024, which is really odd and makes absolutely no sense. I mean, the NFL finally approved the whole alternate jersey thing last year, and fans immediately lined up to buy the jerseys like crazy, including myself. Oh, and the Birds looked fantastic and won both games when they wore the iconic throwbacks in 2023. Sure enough, though, Slay did go on the Liberty Line podcast last week, and technically he did say he doesn't think the Kelly Greens will be back this year.
Obviously, you've been with the Eagles for a little bit now. Is the best jersey the Kelly Green, or what's the best? What's the best?
Kelly Green. Kelly Green.
Green,
Look
right?
at Kelly Green.
You think they're going to bring it back next year?
Hell no, they ain't.
Damn.
All white.
I wish they do.
All white.
The all white?
All white. All white. Everything.
Everything?
White pants, white jerseys. That's
I don't
the
like them
cleanest
Jones.
look.
I like the Kelly Green.
That's the cleanest
black
look.
on black.
White clean, though.
When asked about it on Twitter, Slay kind of doubled down and said, hell, IDK, LOL. I would think they not bringing them out again until later in the years, which I guess you could interpret as either they're not going to bring them out till later this year, like October, November, December, or he actually means years, plural, meaning later in the years, meaning what, 2025, 2026? I don't know. I'm not a Twitter super sleuth here. I can't confirm or deny. I just can't believe that they would actually get rid of the Kelly Green uniforms 1 year after they were a massive success. If you went to any Eagle games last year, I mean, what? A third, maybe 40%, half of the fans were all wearing Kelly Green jerseys, regardless if it was the Dolphin game or the Bills game. I just really hope this whole thing is not true, and I'm sure we'll get an update, so stay tuned for that. By the way, did you buy a Kelly Green jersey last year? I want to kind of see something. If you did buy a Kelly Green jersey, let me know who you got. I got a Jalen Carter one. Comment down below. Now, it happens every June, but like clockwork, we have a couple of interesting few weeks of OTAs and minicamp. We rave about players who stood out. For instance, say John Ross, who suddenly was like, oh, maybe he's a wide receiver 3 or 4 candidate just based off a couple of open practices. Likewise, Isaiah Rodgers, he was fantastic. Keely Ringo went from being a guy we at least hope would show up and somewhat be decent to being really impressive and running with the ones with some of the first team reps. Even Devin White, despite the lack of actual footage, he was all over the ball during 7-on-7s and 11-on-11s. But with these new players rising, there's inevitably some players who technically are falling. And on a roster that only allows 53 people come week 1, some Eagles are going to get cut and some are going to be surprising players that we don't really want to leave. Now, as always, I see criticism saying, Thomas, these players won't be cut. This player will be, not that player. This is my best educated guess at possible surprise cuts. There are clearly 30-plus players who are going to be let go, but I think there are going to be some surprise cuts as well come the end of training camp. For instance, how about Eli Ricks? I mean, he's in his second year, undrafted free agent, and he had one of the most surprising rises to fame following his very impressive preseason that we've seen a Philadelphia Eagle player do in a very long time. He also was thrust onto the field due to the Eagles' lack of cornerback depth, and, for instance, in the Dolphins game, was pretty impressive. And in what was a needy cornerback room, fans instantly, including myself, jumped on the UDFA train saying, oh my gosh, they found their future stud steal out of Alabama. But fast forward to the end of the 2023 season, and Rick struggled, especially in the Niner game, Cardinal game footage, not that great, and he completely fell off the radar during the OTA and minicamp workouts. All we heard was Cooper DeJean this, Quinyon Mitchell that, Isaiah Rodgers here, Keely Ringo there. Ricks was hardly even mentioned. I watched every single Twitter feed I possibly could, talk to people who were actually at OTAs, and no one really mentioned Eli Ricks. I mean, I asked Bleeding Green Nation's managing editor, Brandon Lee Gowton, on my show yesterday, someone who was actually at every single open OTA practice and minicamp, about, hey, how did Eli Ricks look? And here's what he said.
I've only noticed him when he struggled, honestly. So not the best spring for Eli Ricks. And by, contrast, a lot of the other cornerbacks have been looking good and stepping up, such as Isaiah Rodgers, Keely Ringo, Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean. So, I would say kind of stock down on Eli Ricks.
Now, again, I don't want Ricks to go, but let's just be real here. Philly kept 6, maybe 7 corners at max on their roster during the course of last season. Right now, you have Slay, Rodgers, Ringo, DeJean, Mitchell, and Maddox. They're all guaranteed to be there, and that's 6. Bradberry would be 7, but is he a safety? Is he going to be there? Let's just pretend like he's not there right now. You still have a draft pick in Zach McPherson returning from injury, plus plus Josh Jobe, plus a ton of other UDFAs. I'm pulling for Ricks to make this roster. I think if I had to put money on it right now, he'd be the final cornerback to actually be there, whether it's 6 or 7, just because they want to see if he can maybe make a massive jump from year 1 to year 2. But right now, he needs to have a really impressive training camp and hope none of these other UDFAs or year 2 or 3 guys like a Zach McPherson doesn't outplay him, or he might just have to get the boot because, again, you only had 53 players on that final roster. Britton Covey has to be next, and I mentioned him before, and while he didn't necessarily have like a terrible OTA period, he didn't flash, and much like Ricks, he was great at times last year, especially on special teams, but with the addition of Cooper DeJean and Nia Smith, both of whom the Eagles have much higher investments on just based on draft capital alone, plus both have punt returning abilities, the need for a dedicated punt returner like Covey has greatly lessened. I mean, even Isaiah Rodgers, who got punt return work with the Colts, he was working with the punters as well during a couple of OTA periods. He's another versatile player who could steal Covey's job. Covey has got to show he's more than just a punt returner. He has to be able to do 2 things to make this roster: be a good punt returner and also contribute as a wide receiver. I mean, DeJean, for instance, can do both of those things. Second round draft pick, can play corner, can play nickel, can play, safety, but he can also return punts. And Nia Smith, great punt returner. If he turns out to be a better pass catcher than Covey, what's the point of keeping Covey on the roster? Now, like cornerback, the Eagles kept basically 6 receivers at one time on the active roster in 2023. AJ, Smitty, Campbell, Nia Smith, and Johnny Wilson are all basically locks, right? That's 5. John Ross would make it number 6. And I could see them moving Covey back to the practice squad and then using one of their 3 game day activations to move him up to punt returner if they wanted to go ahead and just kind of make sure they don't lose him, which, again, is fine. I don't want Britton Covey to leave. I like him. At the same time, though, if you have a better punt returner in Cooper DeJean or Nia Smith or Isaiah Rodgers or somebody else, what's the point of keeping Britton Covey if he's not going to be wide receiver 3, 4, or 5? Now, speaking of wide receivers, Josh Davis and I have teamed up for another giveaway. This time, it's 1 ticket to Devontae Smith's celebrity softball game where you get to meet Devontae Smith and get a picture with him. Yes, we're giving it away on our Wednesday link live stream. Be sure to subscribe and stay tuned for that. All you got to do in order to win is be subbed to both channels, and if you want to go comment Smitty on my Sunday show, link down below, that's going to help you guys out as well. I think Kenny Gainwell's seat is definitely more safe than the previous 2 players mentioned. I'll explain why in a second, but it's by no means guaranteed. Like, for instance, listen to Brandon Lee Gouton again, just yesterday, talk about how Gainwell might be losing his spot because Will Shipley was very impressive during OTAs.
I don't think the coaching staff has changed their opinion. I think they like him a lot. He did have a couple drops the past 2 days, but I don't think that's needle moving for them. I will say Will Shipley did not have a great start, I thought, to OTAs, but then had a really big day in practice the other day in minicamp and was active as a pass catcher. So, that is something to monitor. And if his stock continues to rise, that obviously impacts Kenny Gainwell potentially in his outlook. But yeah, we have, with the running backs as a whole, didn't see, there's only so much to see when they're not even running the ball, and they're not necessarily the biggest targets in this passing attack either. So limited sample size.
Now, the Eagles did keep 4 running backs last year, but they hardly used 2 of them. Saquon and Shipley, they're basically locks. Kendall Milton's name, though, came up a few times during OTAs as well. That would be 3. Now, they could just keep 3 running backs in order to keep maybe an extra receiver or corner. Wink Eli Ricks, wink Britton Covey. Kenny Gainwell, though, was only on basically a $1.055 million base salary. Getting rid of him if he's unimpressive during training camp wouldn't be hard to do. Now, again, these are surprise cut candidates. There are going to be 30-plus players who aren't going to be surprise cut candidates who actually get cut during the end of training camp, so we're taking some liberty here, but you have to at least mention Nakobe Dean when talking about potentially not the greatest OTA or minicamp periods. Now, Dean, of course, does have the luxury of coming off an injury, and I'm not saying that is the reason why he wasn't running with the ones, because that was definitely Zach Bond and Devin White the majority of the past couple of weeks, but depending on where he's at on his Liz Frank recovery, he doesn't seem to be moving up the depth chart at least the past couple of weeks. Now, the plus for him, the Eagles are very thin at linebacker. You basically have 2, I would say, guaranteed starters right now in Bond and Devin White, and then a bunch of question marks. What happens if Jeremiah Trotter Jr. or Ben Van Sumeren outplay Dean at training camp? Like, the Eagles only kept 4 linebackers last season, basically the entire year, plus Vic Fangio did not draft Nakobe Dean, and for whatever reason, he's been very high on Zach Bond since coming to Philadelphia. My best guess is Dean survives again because they keep 4 linebackers. The 4 will probably be Devin White, Zach Bond, Dean, and obviously Jeremiah Trotter Jr. with Ben Van Sumeren going to, the practice squad to be elevated if he actually needs to be. But again, much like with Britton Covey, Kenny Gainwell, and even Eli Ricks, what happens if Ben Van Sumeren, for instance, has an unbelievable training camp? What happens if Jeremiah Trotter Jr. is clearly leagues better than Nakobe Dean. Do you keep Nakobe Dean on the roster after he basically has failed to win the starting job the past couple of seasons? Do you just let him be a backup and hope that eventually he can figure things out halfway through the year? Nakobe Dean has a very interesting next couple of months coming up. I hope he does well at training camp. I still believe in him, but right now the writing's on the wall. Philadelphia sees him as a long shot to actually be a starter and definitely someone to keep an eye on for cuts during the end of training camp. Am I missing anybody? Let me know down below in the comments section. I was trying to think of surprise candidates because, there's a lot of people like Joseph Ngata is not going to make this football team. I mean, as much as I like Joseph Ngata, I think he maybe has the size, speed, frame that I would like to see as a wide receiver 3, 4, 5. He's not going to beat up Paris Campbell, Anai Smith, Johnny Wilson, the rest of the receivers, right? If I missed somebody, though, let me know down below in the comments section. And of course, it's the offseason. It's June 10th. We've got to speculate a little bit here, and so give me a little bit of leeway on that. Plenty more stuff happening despite it being the offseason. Plenty more interesting videos like this coming as well. I'm Thomas Mott. This has been The Thomas Mott Show.